Thank you, and welcome everybody to the Manhattan CB1 Transportation and Street Activity Permit Committee. I have a lot of absences today, but I'm Betty Kay, the chair, and we have Zach Spaulding, who is the district manager. I'd like to get started with the first item, and I understand we have controller here to speak with us. I'd like to invite you.
Yeah, would you like to speak, Mr. Comptroller?
Thank you guys so much for the invitation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, good evening. I'm New York City Controller Brad Lander. I spend most of my days physically in Community Board 1 in the municipal building, but I'm virtually delighted to be with Manhattan Community Board 1 this evening. And yeah, was just delighted at the invitation to briefly share a little about the report we've recently put out about street safety in the era of micromobility. As somebody who spends a lot of time in Board 1, I know, as all of you do, that the rapid growth of mopeds, e-bikes, scooters over the last few years has been a real safety and quality of life issue. I'll be honest with you, as I travel around the city, this is probably the number one issue that I hear about as I'm talking to people. What's frustrating you? So we wanted to dig in and we looked at really what the numbers are, what the reasons are. And what we found is that since 2020, when the law legalizing e-bikes and e-scooters went into effect, there really has been both a rapid increase in micromobility, but also in crashes and injuries as a result of mopeds, e-bikes, and scooters. That's not all about that law. Mopeds themselves were not changed. It's not legal to operate a moped without a license or have it be driven by a driver without a license. That was true before 2020 and after 2020. So we looked at some other causes as well. Part of that is, of course, the rise of mobile app-based food delivery. But a big part of that we were interested to learn is really the flood of cheap, unsafe e-bike and e-battery technology coming from overseas. The costs have dramatically dropped for electric mopeds and for the batteries that power e-bikes. And a lot of those are not are products that are not licensed or allowed, supposed to be in the United States at all. So we then dug in and said, what are the things that New York City and New York State could do to make a difference here? And we laid out a 9-point plan, and I'll drop the report in the chat, and obviously it's on our website and folks can look at it. But I'll just go over a couple of the points here that we recommend. One is really cutting off the supply of those unsafe and illegal vehicles. You're not allowed to operate a car dealer that sells unlicensed cars to drivers without licenses onto the streets of New York City, but that's essentially what we're doing with mopeds these days. Electric mopeds, the vast majority of them, as you all know, are being operated without licenses, and that is illegal. And yet, even when one is removed, at the points when the NYPD or the sheriff do that, they're so cheap that they just get sold right back in. So we recommend going upstream, and state law was passed in last session that will make this easier for the city to do it, going upstream with enforcement at moped dealers, because you're not allowed to sell, you have to put vehicles with licenses and sell them to drivers with licenses. And as you can see, that is very little what's taking place. So that's number one. Number two is the app delivery companies have to take responsibility here. And we have a model for this because Uber and Lyft in the for-hire vehicle space give all their trip data to the Taxi and Limousine Commission and work with the city on safety standards. And I'm not saying there are no unsafe Uber and Lyft drivers, but there's consequences if you have moving violations, whether those are camera violations, speed cameras or red light cameras, or tickets written by officers if you are an Uber and Lyft driver. And there's nothing in place like that right now for delivery, but there can be if Seamless and DoorDash and Uber Eats are required to have an app license in the way that Uber and Lyft are by the Taxi and Limousine Commission, then they'll have to turn that trip data over to the city and work with the city on safety standards. As you know, those apps can see every single trip. You know, they know when somebody's on the sidewalk. They know when somebody's going faster than the speed limit. They know when somebody's going the wrong way down a one-way street. That's information the apps have and the city doesn't. And we need a delivery app license in the same way that we have for hire vehicle licenses for Uber and Lyft. We can do that with the delivery companies. Then the enforcement that we're doing on the street will actually help change behavior overall. Right now, even when there is some enforcement, it's just a one-off. Even if they pull a moped off the street or do write a ticket, it doesn't ultimately change the system or fundamentally change driver behavior. So we have to do those systemic changes and then align our enforcement with those systems. One thing we recommend in the report is that if an illegal vehicle is seized while it's on a trip for one of those apps, the disposal fee should be extremely high. Let's call it $10,000, because that is what would get Seamless DoorDash and Uber Eats to start taking the safety of New Yorkers and of their customers seriously. And then one thing I'll just add, and then I'll conclude, is that the implementation of congestion pricing, which I'm guessing there's a lot of feelings about in Community Board 1, but I'm a supporter of it because I believe we need to reduce congestion and invest in the subways. But whatever you think about it, it has the opportunity to provide some benefits for the congestion zone, for Lower Manhattan, for Community Board 1. And one of those things could be that there should be, as we see traffic come down, a modest amount, but a meaningful amount, some room for what some people are calling a streetscape dividend. There should be modestly less traffic on the streets. And in some places that will allow for new infrastructure. And we should experiment with micromobility lanes. Part of the challenge is that the e-bikes and the scooters don't go well in bike lanes where they are not, separated and significant. But where you have something like on 14th Street, the busway, there's opportunities for new loading zone experimentation and for new micromobility lane experimentation. And I think if that's something Community Board 1 is interested in, we'd be happy to work with you and think about, where and how and what that would look like as one piece of a broader strategy that includes enforcement, that includes this going upstream efforts, that includes licensing the delivery apps, and that includes new infrastructure. And we believe if we do those things, that it is possible to restore order to our streets, even in this era of micromobility.
Well, thank you very much. And in fact, your multimodal is really very timely. Us, if we're looking at it actually for Canal Street, for Chambers Street, as well as for Route 9A.
What are we looking for? On Canal Street?
Multimodal being discussed really on everywhere.
Isn't Canal Street a highway?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, do you have some time to ask some questions?
Yeah, I've got about 5 minutes. I'm happy to take some questions.
Great. Any questions?
Yes, I'd like to know why there wasn't an emphasis on having the operators of these micro mobility devices to have licenses. I don't propose for them to take a road test, but I do feel that they need to know the rules of the road. I see that there's emphasis on licensing, on registering the vehicle, but I think the operators of these vehicles, especially the, let's say I'm just gonna use the term, the Amazon, like the box bicycle, that can weigh like 900 pounds. These are substantial vehicles. They should have knowledge of the rules of the road, especially if they're gonna share it.
So, as I mentioned before, look, we spent a lot of focus on mopeds because, that is one of the things that has just grown dramatically. If you look at the data, that's where a lot of the crashes and injuries are, those are motor vehicles. So those are already required to be licensed themselves, to have licenses, and their drivers are required to be licensed. And, that is a piece of that, that's a place where, anybody who's driving those has got to have a license and they've got to be licensed. So that is a place where that's already true, but we're not, as a result of having the apps themselves responsible, if we're allowing them to be sold onto the streets without consequence, and the streets then used by the app companies without consequence, then it doesn't matter that that's the law, it's not happening. So I guess what we thought is, by focusing on the supply of those vehicles and by focusing on the app delivery companies who employ folks, that's where the incentives exist. And that's where we believe the best change can be made. E-bikes are more complicated. There are some that go faster than they're allowed, go faster than 25. Or as you point out, there are some, that are much heavier. And I think there's some room to think about if they're really, much heavier, do they need to be categorized as motor vehicles? But things that are essentially more like pedal assist city bikes, that, top out at 17 or 18 miles an hour have proven to be a real benefit for a lot of New Yorkers, and that adding more requirements before people could get on them would have an impact on people's access to transportation. So those were the choices we made here.
But no, I think commercial bicycles, which is what the DOT is now calling them, since they can be up to 48 inches wide, and two of them can carry the equivalent to a box truck content, which has real value for last mile delivery. And I think that's the kind of stuff Eric's talking about, with they're probably going to be in lanes and stuff.
So we didn't look at that in the report, and something I'd be happy to take a closer look at. I think that commercial delivery bicycles, that are the kind that Amazon is using, that are big and heavy, that are part of a business. That's not something we looked at in the report. If you guys have recommendations, we'd be happy to take a look at them. So we didn't explore that and come down against it. It just wasn't one of the things. We took the data from where injuries are and kind of broke things down into those categories. But I think you make a good point, especially in places like Lower Manhattan. As I mentioned, it might make sense to look at new on-street delivery, loading zones. There are new technologies coming, but sure, I think people who are driving big delivery vehicles, that are heavy, that can, and that are always being used as part of a business, it might be reasonable to have a category and some responsibility for the operators of those.
Great, and do you have time, Cody?
I'll be really quick. I just wanted to follow up on your bringing up about micromobility bike, or I think you said micromobility bike lanes. Well, one thing I feel like New York City is woefully behind on are wider bike lanes that will accommodate both traditional cyclists as well as faster cyclists who perhaps are delivery folks. And what you said about as congestion pricing starts to show results, perhaps on those streets, where we have like opportunity for more hardened infrastructure that's can accommodate regular bikes and faster bikes. That would be wonderful.
I think it's a really good idea, and part of where I was thinking about it, I mean, I think Lower Manhattan with congestion pricing and obviously everything that's going on in Board 1 would be a great place to experiment. I was out recently in Queens on the 34th Avenue open street, where they have pedestrianized a big stretch of 34th Avenue, and they imagined it for pedestrians and bicycles, and they made these kind of windy bike lanes, very friendly. All of this before e-bikes and mopeds kind of rose so dramatically, and it's really wrecked the peaceful nature of that park space, when there could be an opportunity, just as you say, to experiment with some new kinds of bike lanes. Let's take some opportunities to try some things and see what works. And I think this is a new technology. It's going to take us some time to get it right, but yeah, I think if you guys are interested in exploring that, I'd be glad to be your ally with DOT. It seems like a good opportunity to try some new things on the delivery front, on the loading front, and on the hard infrastructure front. So Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Sindhu Bharadwaj from my team was the lead researcher and author of the report is here. And stay in touch with her because it sounds like you guys are thinking about some innovative ideas that we would love to keep working together on. So thank you very much and have a great evening. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Sindhu, can you hear us? Or go ahead.
I was gonna ask.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Can we ask her questions?
Yes, we can. Would you be able to take some questions?
Yes. I also, if it would be helpful, I'm happy to provide a little more in-depth overview of the report. I think the comptroller covered the main points, but let me know what would be the most useful to you.
Great, why don't we go to your slides?
Sure.
You don't? Well, then these big questions. So the agenda?
Yeah, I'm happy to run through these quickly, but as the comptroller already said and shared, we released this report about micromobility a few months ago, and this was really in response to the really widespread interest from New Yorkers about these vehicles and their safety impacts. Next slide, please. Oh, you're already. And the what we had three objectives in putting this report out and aim to contextualize the discussions about micromobility in real data about fatalities and injuries and provide a comprehensive amount of information about the existing regulatory landscape, not just at the city, but really at a national level to help build some understanding about the context. And we also proposed a series of strategic recommendations that I heard the comptroller go over that aim to simultaneously improve safety and quality of life in the city while preserving the mobility benefits and that e-bikes and scooters offer New Yorkers. Next slide. So just to get a little more in detail about the street safety data, we requested detailed data from DOT directly on this report, and they actually verified types of vehicles involved in every incident where there was a fatality recorded involving an e-bike and e-scooter. And they did that by reviewing photos taken at crash sites. So we feel pretty confident that the data in our report is actually the most accurate data available on this topic when it comes to what the safety information and impacts of micromobility really is in New York. And what this data revealed is that riding these vehicles is a lot more dangerous than sharing the road with them. And 76 e-bike and scooter riders died in crashes between 2020 and 2023 since legalization. And deaths among moped riders have also grown over the past 4 years. And actually deaths among moped riders is increasing at a rate that exceeds every other mode. So there's like a real need to be targeted in our approach to each and differentiate them more carefully. Next slide, please. We also examined the impacts of micromobility on pedestrian safety and found that e-bikes and scooters account for about 1.3% of pedestrian deaths and about 2.6% of injuries since their legalization 4 years ago. And we put this into context besides automobiles and motor vehicles because cars, SUVs, and trucks caused about 96% of pedestrian fatalities over the same period. Although, of course, we will note that fatalities and injuries involving micromobility were, of course, virtually non-existent prior to 2020, and the current numbers represent, a serious trend that's worth examining closely and call for a more proactive management approach. Next slide. So managing the growing popularity and number of micromobility devices in New York City is a really complex task, and it involves a lot of coordination between multiple government entities, not just within the city, but at the state and federal levels as well, cooperation from the private sector, and more innovative legislative and regulatory action. And we think that more effective management really requires understanding the root cause of the safety and regulatory challenges related to this mode of transportation. And some of the challenges I'll highlight include the low cost of unsafe and not non-street legal e-bikes that can be easily imported and purchased from foreign countries. These are the same devices that are that have been responsible for deadly fires in residential buildings, and the problem is then compounded by a lack of reliable and convenient charging locations in the city, although that is slowly changing. And then you have the rise of the mobile app-based delivery industry that's fueled reliance on e-bikes and mopeds among a very large population of low-wage workers. And at the same time, there's really not a lot of accountability for those companies. And simultaneously, law enforcement strategies and infrastructure and street design interventions haven't fully adapted to micromobility specific challenges. So, these things altogether create a very large challenge for government, and that responsibility is dispersed among multiple public agencies. So we tried to design our recommendations to speak to each of these challenges and make sure that we were being thoughtful in our strategy. Next slide, please. So the comptroller went over, I think, most of our recommendations, but I'll just run through them quickly here. We actually proposed 9 different recommendations that hit city, state, and federal level actions. But some of the most important ones, for the first is taking action at all levels of government to cut off the supply of illegal vehicles in New York City. So again, a lot of the most dangerous e-bikes that you see in New York City are probably not supposed to be on the street in the first place. So, but riders can easily purchase them from Amazon or dealerships that are selling equipment that don't meet domestic safety standards. And addressing that issue is really going to take the city expanding capacity at agencies like FDNY and DCWP to enforce fines and penalties against retailers, but the state DMV actually plays a big role in this because they are responsible for maintaining oversight over illegal moped dealers and enforcing laws requiring that people who purchase these vehicles hold driver's licenses as the law already requires. But when it comes to stopping the import of illegal vehicles or uncertified equipment, that really is a federal responsibility. And we need much more stringent oversight of the types of products that eventually end up in New York City streets. It looked like a federal bill to restrict the import of uncertified e-bike batteries is going to pass, but that was actually taken out of the most recent congressional budget deal at the last moment. Next slide, please. And then the delivery app companies, as many of you may know, these companies require workers to complete a large number of orders very quickly, and the workers who don't complete that number risk losing their jobs and having their accounts deactivated. And this productivity and efficiency standard is really the cause of a lot of the risky riding behavior that we see on the streets among workers who are using e-bikes and mopeds. And we strongly believe that the city needs to regulate this industry, and we propose a licensing program for that purpose. And some of the features of that program are strong deactivation protections for for workers so that they don't have to, speed or ride recklessly at risk of losing their jobs, and some data sharing requirements. I know the comptroller spoke to that, so I won't repeat it, but this really is the one of the major proposals coming out of this report. And next slide. And then another recommendation I'll highlight is in the need for investment in high quality infrastructure. I heard somebody mention the need for wider bike lanes, and we very much agree. And thankfully we've seen some bike lanes in the city widened already to 10 feet. And what we see globally in cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen that have really high volumes of cyclists, bike lanes up to 12 feet are the norm. And that really is the size that's necessary to allow riders who are traveling at different speeds to safely pass one another and share lane space. So we do think that that's something that the city should invest in more. And we'd also like to see more dedicated e-bike parking and neighborhood loading zones to cut down on sidewalk riding and create more dedicated space for micromobility. Next slide. Really where I'll stop. These recommendations are designed to restore the sense of order and more proactively manage micromobility. And it's our goal to see these devices become a more safe and predictable feature of the city's transportation landscape. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mimi.
Hi, thanks. That was a really good presentation. I appreciate all the thought that you put into this report. I noticed that there wasn't anything about inspections, like for potential mechanical failures or for lights, etc. Has that been considered and tossed out for any reason?
Do you mean inspections of e-bikes used by individual riders, or?
Yeah, just like how how you get your car inspected to make sure that the windshield wiper the windshield wipers are installed, the windshield doesn't have cracks, that the brakes work and the lights work, and etc. Like basic safety things, their seatbelts, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are a few recommendations that I think touch on that, even though it's not really a explicit standalone recommendation in this report. The first is that DCWP, the City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, is responsible for regulating retailers in the city that sell e-bikes. So that includes actually online and brick and mortar stores. And they have like a long checklist of things that they're looking for when they inspect these items. And I think really what they're looking for is that they're certified by Underwriter Laboratories or an equivalent standard. So
Yeah,
the key now is
like making sure that the brakes will continue to work. Like this is a maintenance issue with the owner, right? Not like when it's purchased, it certainly should be in full working order and good with all the appropriate logos. But afterwards, like if my battery is about to die, it would be found on the inspection that happens annually for a vehicle. My motorcycles are inspected, my vehicles are inspected, and I would hope that whatever electrical connections are connecting to batteries on these vehicles, or if the batteries are near the end of their life and shouldn't be used anymore, that we would have some way to verify that the vehicles on the street are safe.
Yeah, I understand. I think there are some challenges with this. One is that e-bikes are considered consumer products and not vehicles at the federal level, and they're regulated accordingly. So things like inspections don't really have like an administrative infrastructure behind them.
It's a state thing. Like inspections are state mandated, not federally mandated. Some states have
Um,
inspections.
for a motor vehicle.
Yeah, for a motor vehicle. But anyway, moving on from that, I think I made my point there. The micromobility infrastructure that's been added in London has caused more congestion over time. And that's something that we should also consider. Thanks. In the congestion zone. So congestion goes down and then it goes up.
Car condition.
Yes.
Yes, any other questions? Well, then, thank you. I guess you answered all.
Go ahead online, you got Tammy.
Justine,
Tammy and Justine have questions.
Tammy first.
Hi, I think I'll jump in and I'll go first. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm actually chair of the community board. And I wanted to ask, because we've had these discussions with NYPD before, and I'm rather concerned about the statistics in the slide presentation, only because NYPD has affirmed, and our Assembly Member Glick has had the experience specifically, that NYPD is not required to report nor track pedestrian and bike incidences where pedestrians have been hit. So the statistics that are being used are actually quite off. In fact, when Assemblymember Glick was hit, it took over an hour and she had to force NYPD to report it. So I have some concerns about the presentation of the materials, how we're talking about it, because we do have these vehicles on, and they are vehicles, and they are being used to, in every way that a vehicle is being used, whether it's in micromobility, whether it's in transporting goods, services, deliveries, things that used to take place on the street, we now have these types of transit on the sidewalks in the greenway, and they are a safety hazard to pedestrians. So I have a serious concern about the statistics because there's no caveat, there's no nothing in here that talks about the fact that there is no requirement for NYPD to report nor track the pedestrian and the bicycle incidences. Do you have any way or legislation or anything else that the controller's office is looking to add to this presentation? And by the way, I have a second question, to be able to get that real information.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think the lack of reliable data is actually a really big challenge on this issue. And we do have a recommendation in our report. I didn't highlight it in the presentation, but we do have a recommendation about improving data collection and reporting so that we have a more accurate understanding of the scope of any safety issues. And the lack of standardized data collection, I think, is something that makes it really difficult to have fact-based conversations about this topic. And we agree that that's a real gap in our understanding. So we included that in our report, and actually our office testified at a city council hearing about this topic recently, and flagged that as something we'd like to see the council take action on.
I'd like to see that represented in any public reporting that you do, like this one, because it looks a little bit disingenuous. Not saying that it is, but it doesn't represent everything, and I think it could be done better for the public when you're going to community boards. Secondly, and thirdly, some of my concerns about the controller's recommendations don't solve the issues that we have, because the drivers of these vehicles are not educated, for example, on rules of the road, right? So when they get to an intersection, sometimes they're going the right way on a street, sometimes they're going against traffic on the streets. They don't stop and follow intersection rules. So if you're in a multi-turn intersection, they're zigzagging any which way that they can, because obviously they're trying to make their living. So what stands does the controller have, and where does he see on two parts? One, any kind of legislation or rulemaking that would require them to follow the rules of the road and be on the street, versus being on the sidewalks and be able to be ticketed. Two, where does he stand in terms of registration of these vehicles on a state level? The mopeds are one thing. The e-bikes now go sometimes as fast as mopeds. Legal or not, whether the organization has to license those vehicles that they then loan to their employees, AKA like the Department of Buildings cars or anything else like that. There should be some kind of a process that is far more extensive to be able to track. That's one. And two, are we ever going to get to a point if the speed limit in Lower Manhattan is now lowered to 25 and these bicycles can go 25, they're no different than a car in terms of travel speeds. So why aren't people required to have any kind of training like you would a driver's license? And where does the controller sit on all of that? We have a system that's already in existence on the state level. Why aren't we levying the assets that we have to improve the current situation?
There are a few things in our report that I'd like to point to. I think that was a multifaceted question, so I'll do my best to address it comprehensively. So I think, part of our intention in spending so much time in this report laying out the landscape of micromobility was to think through the root causes of both the safety issues that e-bikes. And we spend a lot of time looking at the perverse incentives that the app companies push to riders, and that's behind a lot of the risky behavior we see on streets. We also acknowledge that street enforcement has failed in a lot of ways, and there are a lot of behaviors and existing rules that are just already against the law and aren't being followed. So we would like to see a more strategic approach to enforcement, and the comptroller is against sidewalk riding and salmoning or going the wrong way on a street, and we would like to see the NYPD or anybody that's responsible for enforcement target the highest risk behaviors. So that's something that I think is a long-term challenge, but it is something we recommend very clearly in our report. What are the behaviors that are most likely to lead to a crash or an injury, and those are the types of actions that we'd like to see enforcement targeting against. So if that is exceeding the speed limit or riding on the sidewalk recklessly, I think it makes sense to target those behaviors. And then the supply side piece, I think, is also a big part of the issue. E-bikes that are heavy enough or capable of going fast enough to cause a serious injury are already illegal under state law and should not be as easily purchased in the city as they already are. And that's something that will take a lot more effort on the part of both the city and the state to regulate. And it's the state DMV that's responsible for making sure that illegal mopeds especially aren't sold to riders who don't have licenses or meet certain standards. And we have a lot of concerns that they aren't doing enough to meet their obligations right now. So that's just one area where more could be done. But our hope is that in addressing this issue from the supply side, it would be impossible for micromobility to do the kinds of damage that I think a lot of people have concerns about.
But it doesn't change user behavior, no matter what the supply is. The issue is not how many Volkswagens you have on the road, it's the person who drives and uses it.
Right, and I think that's why we would like to see more proactive regulation of the app companies and more strategic street enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Justine?
Thanks so much, Betty. Thank you so much for this great presentation so far and all this information. So my question's a little bit different than what everybody else is focused on, which is wonderful because I support everything that Tammy just said and what Mimi said, and your presentation was lovely. Question, and I think I know the answer to, and then I've got another comment and a question. The fatality figures that you noted before, they include people being struck on the street by mobility these vehicles. Not battery fires, correct?
Yes, the fatalities are only street traffic crashes.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I've assumed. And but I'm wondering if we don't want to start considering the or make a separate category, but consider how many people have been injured and how much property damage has come into play because of the battery fires inside. And that brings me to my next question, which is especially in Lower Manhattan and CB1, we have a lot of tall buildings with whether they're condos, co-ops, or rentals, or even offices, right? Many people, whether they're condo boards or the management companies, don't know how to regulate and prohibit people bringing their e-bikes inside and what's reasonable, because people with mobility scooters, like what someone who is mobility impaired needs to use, they would need to bring their scooters inside to charge them, and that needs to be broken out and separated, right? But you also want it to be safe. But what can the comptroller do, and what can be put into place to give some teeth and some I don't know, enforcement power to the condo boards, the co-op boards, the rental buildings to prohibit people from bringing their e-bikes or their batteries inside to charge? Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the questions. I think, again, as far as our report goes, I think we're hoping that cracking down on uncertified equipment and illegal batteries, which are exclusively, at least in New York, the cause of the residential building fires we've seen, will prevent the risks, or at least cut down on the risks of indoor storage of this equipment. As far as enforcement, where we're currently at, that is, I mean, as you point out, that is something that the report doesn't cover. And I think if there is something, if there's a proposal that CB1 has, or if a council member has a proposal, that's something we'd love to take a look at and work with you on. I think, as this is a very interdisciplinary issue, and we address this from a transportation angle, but I think that's something that we could also look at. And we have like a really great housing team at our office, and I'm sure that's something that they would have thoughts on or potentially could weigh in.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll talk about it more, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Cody?
Just one quick follow-up about the regulating app-based industry via a city administered licensing program. What city agency would that be that would regulate the based industry? And is there any, and you're compiling this report, do you think there's any momentum politically or whatever as far as, making that actually come to fruition?
Yeah, great question. I think that's something that's been in the public conversation since last year, when the mayor, during the State of the City, suggested creating a Department of Sustainable Delivery. And the way he framed it, that would be a new agency or something that would be created under the mayor's office. And because different aspects of this issue are under the jurisdictions of different city agencies. Like DOT is responsible for infrastructure, NYPD for enforcement, and DCWP for the regulation of, they're responsible for the current minimum pay standards for delivery workers. We think that this is something that would have to be a collaboration between multiple agencies, and are kind of agnostic on where it sits, but it's very clear that it would need a collaborative approach.
Great, are there any other questions? With that, I want to you, but I also want to thank you specifically for looking at the issues of electric mobility devices, because using a mobility scooter as I do, I can't walk. So I live with mobility scooter all the time. I sleep next to it. You know, it's just what I do. On the other hand, it is, if you look at the FDNY, they do talk about fires in certified batteries as well. But the fear of the batteries is really so outsized to what the problem is. Fires are obviously they're an issue when they occur. But other people realize just how many people like me sit next to a lithium-ion battery all the time, and I've done it for decades. And I've looked up some of the people who sell these things on mobility devices. They've had 20 years with no fires or any problems with their batteries. So, you know, it just depends on what kind of sampling you get of how horrible a story is or is not. But I do wish when people would look at it, they would seriously look at mobility devices as well as e-bikes, because there is a real concern of getting swept up into the same rulemaking. And that is a concern. That is how I get around. But it was fascinating, and I do think, and I want to tell you too, that one of the comments made about e-bikes, I run into them all physically. I come into them in contact all the time, especially sidewalk riders, because I use the same curb cuts that they do. And I have had nothing but courtesy from them, stepping out of the way. And one of the places where I think pedestrians get upset and no one mentions it, but if you have a bike lane, there's no stop line in a bike lane like there is car lane. So when they do stop at the traffic light, they block the curb cut, because they go right up to the edge of the curb, which I don't blame them for doing. And then they try very hard to back up, and they do. They're incredibly courteous. But that's another problem that creates problems for pedestrians. Really isn't the cyclist's fault, because they're very apologetic when it does happen.
That's just for you, Betty.
Well, I know, but I'm very sympathetic. I can't move around them the way somebody could walk and turn sideways and do anything. But very informative and a very important topic, and I love the report. So thank you for all the work you put into it.
Thank you. I think Zach has my contact information, so I'm happy to follow up if there are any more questions. And yeah, thank you again for hosting me tonight.
Again,
Thank you.
Thank you.
to our second presentation. We're into electrical devices. You can see I'm an electrical device person. Anyway, we could want to turn to the next slide. So we're ready also to go to the slide deck. We're going to talk, well, they're going to talk about sustainable last mile deliveries in dense urban areas, which I think you've all heard little bits about with Pier 6. So now we're going to hear from a group that's actually doing some work in it. So they're sort of ahead of where the DOT is in terms of Pier 6. And thank you, Lauren. I'd like to introduce your team and
Great, take us.
floor.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Lauren Kessler O'Brien. I'm with
Maybe that's how you advance the slides.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, thank you for having me. It's been a fascinating conversation already. And I'm here to talk about a project that we are working on called Sustainable Last Mile Delivery in Dense Metros. There are a few members, supporters, partners, and team members who are here with me who will participate in parts of the conversation. I'll just quickly introduce. This is Paul Lipson, who is working with us on this project. Martin Romani, sorry, Martin, who is supporting the technical side of this project, and then Angel Lopez, who is on the Empire Clean Cities team, being the engagement manager, and Ilana Maid Dennis, thank you, who is someone we're working with in alignment on this project. So a little bit of background on Empire Clean Cities. We're a 501c3 nonprofit here in New York City. We are based actually here in your district at 55 Water Street. We sit in the New York City Department of Transportation, where we originated from, and ultimately moved into being an independent nonprofit to have a little more flexibility in the projects that we do, but we work closely with the Department of Transportation. We are a part of a nationwide network of clean cities and communities organizations. So our mission is to ensure clean air for future generations by providing citizens and stakeholders with reliable information about alternative fuels and advanced vehicle technology, ultimately moving away from fossil fuel transportation. We have, since 2007, been able to help reduce 45,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions each year. So as I mentioned, we are a member of a larger network of coalitions, and there's a map showing you where the other Clean Cities and Communities coalitions are located. We work closely with partners all over, and that has been really beneficial for us to share technologies, ideas, strategies for reducing carbon emissions and transportation congestion, et cetera. There are over 75 coalitions nationwide under the U.S. Department of Energy. The program's been around for over 30 years. Our goal is to reduce emissions and cut petroleum consumption in the transportation sector specifically. We have helped to deploy over 2 million alternative fuel vehicles. Incidentally, we work very closely with the different fleets here in New York City to support their transition away from fossil fuel vehicles. And here in New York State, we have 6 coalitions. We work very closely with all of them, and you can see on the map there. So this project that I'm here to talk to you about is we won funding from the U.S. Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office. The project started this past summer, and the goal is to deploy and demonstrate sustainable methods of last mile delivery, pairing maritime middle mile transportation and with cargo bikes to reduce traffic emissions and congestion caused by the increase in last mile delivery and e-commerce that we've seen, particularly since the pandemic. The idea, the genesis of this project was thinking about the underutilized maritime infrastructure, port infrastructure around New York City, the increase in congestion and the cost of that congestion, whether that is pedestrian safety, emissions, noise pollution, the list goes on. And then this emerging sector of multimodal delivery transportation that is growing in other parts of the world very quickly. And so the goal of this project is to consider these factors and pair the different modes that we see presenting new opportunities, being micromobility and maritime infrastructure. So the main goals of this project in phase 1, which started in July of 2024 and runs through this next July, we hope to launch and are planning now the first phase of the pilot, which will be doing deliveries between Brooklyn's Pier 11 near the IKEA and Governor's Island. We've been working very closely with the Trust for Governor's Island and vendors on the island. And in the next slide, we'll go into some more detail about some of the dry runs that we've had and experiences that we've had thus far. But just as an overview, that's phase 1. Phase 2, we plan to expand the service to include Hunts Point and Lower Manhattan. And that's where we'll really start to be able to build a business case. Governor's Island is going to be a great pilot. And then we hope to expand and really support the reduction of truck traffic into Lower Manhattan by expanding. Phase 3 is to scale to other warehousing neighborhoods, particularly port communities that have experienced that could would benefit from the revitalization of the transportation, and to just, support communities that are overwhelmed by the truck traffic, which we can all relate to, I think. Finally, the project is, we have embedded social environmental impacts. As I mentioned, we were concerned with reducing traffic congestion, noise pollution, emissions, and also there is a workforce development component of this that we plan to create jobs. We are working with a logistics partner and plan to have a training program as well as provide living wage jobs with W-2s and accountability. So I'll pass it over to Martin for a moment to talk to you a little bit about the cargo bike that we are in the process of acquiring. That this funding is going to allow us to purchase about 25 bikes. The first shipment of 5 is going to arrive hopefully in January for the pilot. Maybe I'll go through this and then when there are questions, Martin, you can take it. Okay. So this here is a Fulpra electric cargo bike. It is made in the Netherlands, and Martin has been back and forth a couple of times to work out this agreement. We're really excited. These are very powerful and small vehicles. They can carry up to 815 pounds and are used currently in Europe by FedEx and DHL and other delivery companies, including in Canada as well. The top speed is 18 miles per hour, and we are currently going through a Underwriter Laboratory UL certification process that was mentioned in the last presentation. That is, will provide a baseline for safety. So phase 1, again, we launched this summer. We've had several trial runs between Brooklyn's Pier 11 and all 3 of the piers at Governor's Island. We also did a test run between the Maritime Battery Building during their climate week just a couple of months ago. And everything went great. I think the vendors, as you can see, were really excited to have an alternative delivery option. Everyone we've talked to has been really excited. They currently pay a premium to have truck delivery to Governor's Island, and it aligns really nicely with all the different climate-related projects that they're involved with to be the pilot for this. So it's been a really great partnership that we are looking forward to launching a full service, which will, be possibly daily, hopefully something like that starting this summer. We are also working with the Blue Highways Coalition and submitted to their RFI earlier this summer and are in ongoing communication with them about the possibilities. We are one of the first projects that is operationalizing this multimodal delivery model. So we're really excited to do that and want to support expansion and catalyzation of this alternative mode and ultimately to reduce truck traffic. So we're working with several different organizations, including Ilana here, who is with the Coastal Service and can talk a little bit about what they're doing. We are working with New York Water Taxi, and they've been supporting the pilot that will run between Brooklyn and Governor's Island. And as I mentioned, we hope to start service spring, summer of 2025. Phase 2, which will begin after that, summer 2025. As I mentioned, we hope to expand to the Seaport District and adjacent neighborhoods, and then to continue the Governor's Island service, as well as launch workforce development activities and trainings, and to continue the trainings that we are developing presently. Phase 3 will be scaling by expanding partnerships throughout New York City, as well as sharing lessons learned with other cities. So that is an overview. I know it's a lot of information and I'm happy to answer any questions and also to have my colleagues here answer questions as well.
So a lot of people I know who will have questions.
Yes.
But first of all, what pier are you looking at in the Seaport District?
The Battery Maritime Building is what we're starting with, SLIP 5, we think.
Okay.
The heliport would also be great when it's up and running.
So you'd actually be entering through FIDI to get to the
I
Seaport.
think so. We think so for now.
Great, thank you. Hody, I know you had your hand up.
I have just a question I asked earlier, that I wanted to hear your position on like, more expanded wider bike lanes for these cargo bikes for your network, because, you know, the chicken before the egg. I mean, like, you know, are you advocate, I mean, I don't know what your.
Let me, yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack. And
Okay.
I'm going to pass it over to Martin
Oh.
because Martin is with the Hub NYC and has been working in the micromobility space since before it was even a twinkle in my eye. So Martin, maybe
Can I
you can.
add something to
Yeah.
that's related to that? The bicycle that you showed earlier too. The one that DOT got the rule change for was 15 mph maximal and they were pedal assist. So the ones you're looking at from the Netherlands also pedal assist and they were obviously a little bit faster. Potentially.
Yeah, they're pedal assist and the software can control the top speed. So that's not a
Okay,
big deal.
so now you know kind of what speed and size we're talking about and.
Yeah, and these are like, they comply with the new regulations on size, the DOT regulations. But to your point, like those regulations, right, that if you are the max size, and we're not even the max size, you shouldn't be in the bike lane. The bike lanes aren't wide enough. There's some in Brooklyn, like the dedicated bike lane that runs along. Yeah, along the waterfront, like that's okay, because it's 2 lanes and it's pretty wide, but outside of that, you know, we don't wanna, the intent here is not to make things unsafe, so.
DOT has installed wider bike lanes at Second Avenue, Sixth Avenue, which are like double.
Where they're available, we'll certainly leverage them, but for the average, you know, ones that are whatever it is, 40 or 48, like or whatever, I don't know offhand, like it would be really unsafe for us to be in there because we'd essentially take.
Right, exactly.
Eric and then Brendan.
For the design, why was that a 3-wheeler selected instead of the Cardi B, the DOT little bike? Because we live in a 4-season climate with rain and snow and blustery wind. I think it would be more comfortable for the operator to have a little protection.
Yeah, I can comment to that. So a couple of things. One, you know, one of the reasons that we selected this particular bike is because it's automotive grade and it's fleet scalable. So like the Cardi B, for instance, maybe can carry 200 pounds, maybe, but that's like max. We can carry at least 815 and a lot more volume. So that's number one. Number two, we totally agree with the weather, you know, the climate issues. Fact of the matter is, in Europe and Canada, they use these 3-wheelers, but because of Amazon, the manufacturer's making a 4-wheeler with an enclosed cabin. So we'll have one of those by the end of next year as well. There are some weather protection elements that aren't shown here that we can add to the bike. But those are 2 of the reasons. I think the third is, this is what's referred to as an automotive grade e-bike. So it's built to the same standard as like a Tesla in Europe. Cardi B is a consumer grade thing that's just slapped together, and like you couldn't use it for daily delivery operations. So like this is something like FedEx could put in there, they have in their catalog actually. You can run this thing for thousands of miles before failure. So those are just a few of the reasons.
So is the 815 pound weight limit or cargo limit, is that imposed by the DOT or is that from the device?
It's actually from the manufacturer, but the truth is they've gotten it higher. This is supposed to be like a small box truck replacement in Europe in terms of volume.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brendan.
Sorry. You talked about delivering to like Governor's Island, et cetera. Who and what are you delivering to Governor's Island?
So we're in conversation with all of the vendors on the island. So we've delivered to Little Ava's, Grow NYC. And we're in conversation with the QC Spa. They're very interested. We are in the process now of putting together a presentation to share with them schedule, pricing, and logistical operations information so that they can plan their season. And like I said, the trust has been really supportive. And so I think they're going to encourage gently, kindly, all of the vendors really to take advantage of the services to ultimately, you know, get rid of the trucks on the island if possible. But we're in touch with all of them.
So
We
lots of
haven't-
food and beverage commodities.
Yeah.
Linens, for instance.
The school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Buttermilk Labs, and actually they're in the process of the construction side, so we are talking about supporting some of it.
There's gonna be a lot of construction.
That's right, yeah.
So you deliver there, you said there's a major distribution somewhere, like how are these distributed?
So,
Might have missed that.
yeah, no, we're still figuring out which partnership to move forward with for the logistics, but we're working very closely at this point with Net Zero Logistics. They handle shipping for Amazon and other other deliveries here in New York City, you know, have thousands of vehicles in operation. And so they have several micro hubs. They're exploring building one at Pier 11, and that's probably what we would use in Brooklyn, Pier 11, for the distribution to Governor's Island. Once we,
It's Atlantic Basin.
yeah, you know where IKEA is? I
Well-
feel like
No,
that's
that's
the
Red Hook.
easiest
Red
way
Hook
to-
is like Kia.
Yeah, it's Atlantic Basin. which
It's
is-
just south of IKEA, so
Okay,
between,
got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, Red Hook and Carroll Gardens.
Okay.
But the intent here, these are not consumer vehicles. So we're not,
Right,
when we
yeah.
scale this up, we're not gonna lease or sell these to people who are, 1099 or, independent contractors on the Uber apps. These will be sold to fleets that have their own sort of infrastructure, their own training, their own W-2 employees, their own facilities. So that, these are companies that already have places in Manhattan where they're staging.
And that are running trucks into Manhattan.
That
Well, then,
answer-
how do you guarantee safety aspect? I mean, I'm just thinking of one of these things trying to meander down the narrow streets of the financial district, getting frustrated because they're blocked in traffic for 15 minutes. That could easily fit on a sidewalk. I'm hearing it's carrying at least 815 pounds. That's a recipe for disaster. One of those things is barreling down the street and it's outside now of the purview of the DOT. It's off to some, I guess, I don't know if they're licensees or whoever you are selling these things to. How do you guarantee that they're going to operate it safely, other than just that they swear and promise that they'll train their people right?
Yeah, I mean, these are companies with really strong track records that have training and safety programs.
They have salaried employees.
Yeah,
They're not 1099 employees.
it's just like, how do you guarantee the FedEx guy isn't gonna drive it?
You don't, and they do, right? That's the problem.
Yeah, so
Only
then-
they're a lot smaller and hopefully you can get out of the way quickly now, no guarantee, but I can imagine something like that. Not to put with the idea, it's a concern, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we don't, obviously don't recommend these to be ridden on the sidewalk. They really can't be. They should be on the road.
Well, it's illegal.
Right.
It's just that they can fit. I mean, looking at the size of the DHL driver on the right, wide enough, narrow enough rather, that could fit easily on a sidewalk.
You're absolutely right. It could fit on a sidewalk. A box truck could fit on a sidewalk too, and they jump the curbs all the time. We rely on truck delivery, unfortunately. It's a fact of life in New York City, especially Manhattan. We get 180,000 truck trips onto this island every single day. The goal here is to take a portion of those trucks off the road and replace them with what we believe is the most responsible, safest technology that can responsibly defray the carbon, defray the truck miles, and using the most responsible possible corporate actors in a company called Net Zero Logistics, which is Amazon's largest third-party logistics partner in New York.
No doubt, I
Yeah.
totally think we
Yeah.
all support that,
Yeah.
and the logic would dictate then that you'd have fewer trucks on the
Right.
road in that last mile area. I
Yeah.
get all of that, I'm just saying that human beings being human beings,
They
they're
absolutely
operated by, it's a concern.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick, before you came in, I think you probably didn't hear the question that Eric had for the controller. And that was about, what do you do when you get into bigger e-bikes and them not being licensed or having any other requirements? And they're not the same as the deliveristas on a regular small bicycle shaped.
Yeah, I heard the question, I heard the controller's response.
So I think it is something that probably needs to be explored and looked at, so
Right.
do keep that in mind too.
Well, and I mentioned the part of this program is developing trainings that the employers, the logistics companies will then use. And so those trainings will have safety components, legal components, what's, allowable, what isn't, as well as maintenance and other related training.
Can you build enforcement mechanisms into your, I'm serious,
Yeah, so
into your
there's a
sales
lot.
agreements?
So we can
Software?
build, one of the things, like, there's a very robust, IoT on this. So we may be able to actually set up geo fences and alerts, like we're open to, if the buyers and licensees want to share the data with the city. Also, like, from our perspective, this vehicle, like most Sprinter vans in the city go like, if you look at the total volume, they're also not fully utilized. We can almost replace a Sprinter van with this. And because of that, like, it would make sense to have these licensed and, to your point earlier, inspected. They should be inspected.
Absolutely.
Like, every year, do the brakes work? Do the lights work? Does the backup camera work? Do you have your side view mirrors? So we're all for it.
Yeah, that makes sense, and then build it in kind of on the front end as you're selling these things. in.
Yeah, but there is IoT, and we could, in theory, share that data with whatever agency puts together.
It'd be nice if you could max, yeah.
It'd be cool to have like pollution sensors in there just to get a map of the city, just for
That's
fun.
interesting.
Before moving on to that, one thing was, last month, in fact, we looked at Pier 6 and some of the changes there, including putting in some of the cargo bikes in that program, not just EV tools, but the other electric side. And one of the questions there came up with the training aspect. And that was, since you're preparing people for green employment in the future or retraining, move into that direction. I know there was a lot of interest they were looking at various training programs, existing high schools and college programs, and getting involved. Has that ever been discussed either? Another thing to do, since you'd be source for training or ideas.
Yeah, we think that there will be a lot of commercial opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity here, particularly because you don't actually need a driver's license to operate one of these. And I'm not saying that, it just is one less bar to entry. Because we will be going through logistics providers, there will be training in operation and maintenance and safety. But we see it as an opportunity for people to enter this new job market.
Maybe you smile because it's a double-edged sword.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, you shouldn't have said that. But
Well,
I just feel if you're on the road, you need to know what a stop sign means,
absolutely, and that will 100% be a part of our training. I just mean from a perspective of providing good employment opportunities where there are fewer barriers. This is an opportunity to.
I would say the CDL more than the driver's license.
Yeah.
is usually a barrier to entry. And we work with the Trucking Association in New York, and they've noticed such a downturn in, younger people that are going to go CDL certified. So the fleets are having trouble recruiting, and this is kind of a way, this is another pathway to employment that wouldn't require someone to hold a CDL. Driver's license.
Yeah.
People are so desperate, there's a $5,000 bounty in the outer boroughs now for CDL drivers. If you want to go get a job as a CDL, you can get a $5,000 bonus on your paycheck if you want to work for a meat distributor in Hunts Point, for instance, simply because there's so few people who want to do it right now.
They wouldn't just get them a CDL, like, if it's like, we'll pay for you to do that.
They do, their Manhattan Beer, for instance, largest beer distributor east of the Mississippi, has its own CDL training program, and they cannot recruit enough.
Right, and the Trucking Association of New York is really excited about this project for that reason, because they see it as a way to recruit people.
And to, I think you'll find that the insurance industry, the risk industry, the coverage may not be there, and that's gonna be an issue as that gets built on too. But if you're talking about a commercial enterprise, they care about liability. they are gonna wanna be insured.
Betty, can I ask, while you're talking about insurance and things like that for deliveries, one of the things that concerns me is the rise that we have of what's the difference between a person driving one of these and offloading onto the streets, which is what we currently have from trucks of all sizes, large and small. And what is going to guarantee that they're going to follow the rules of the road? Currently, we have Whole Foods delivery guys with the boxes or bike deliveries, and they're driving the wrong way on a one-way street. They're not necessarily allowed into some building delivery areas, so they're parked on sidewalks in front of buildings and double parked as well. So I think Governor's Island is a very good place to roll it out, but it's a utopia without sidewalks and legal streets. It's a very different delivery location. It's like delivering into the middle of a park. It doesn't have the same interactions, and it definitely doesn't have the car system that we have on island, our island versus Governor's. So I'd like to hear what is in place to ensure that they are following the same questions I asked the controller's office. What is in place that guarantees they follow traffic laws, they're not parked on sidewalks, they're parked in commercial parking spots? How is this going to make it any better versus just adding to the problem?
Yeah, well, to define the problem right now is 180,000 fossil fuel cargo trucks that pass through Manhattan every single day. A huge proportion of them come into lower Manhattan, of course.
That's for your post-congestion.
That is a very good point. It may be, the big fleets we work with actually are welcoming congestion pricing because they can get there and back quicker. So I'm not sure it's cutting down on commercial traffic, but that's a whole other conversation I'm happy to have. What your question directly points to is, who is a responsible actor in this city? Who is a responsible operator? And right now, we have a Wild West. We have reckless operators. We have lots of 1099s who are just trying to make a living, who have very little familiarity, probably with traffic rules. I think the difference between what you've experienced and what you're observing and what this pilot is about is the pilot is with a longstanding responsible operator that has trained, salaried employees and doesn't exploit people by relying on independent contractors who don't have benefits and do not have job security. Martin can speak to net zero logistics much more intelligently than I can, but that to me is the bulwark for us to ensure that the rules of the road are followed, because there's a lot riding on a big company doing the right thing and not violating the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of that also has to do with the independent contractors. There's not a lot of recourse with that. Again, like, we're totally open to the idea of licensing the vehicles and having some kind of enforcement schema, because we feel like, if we get penalized for trying to do the right thing, and so we want to have a system in place so that the good actors can really thrive. I can't, our experience with net zero doesn't deliver the Whole Foods. So Whole Foods is, in our experience, like really kind of the Wild West, and that equipment, in our opinion, is quite unsafe. With consumer e-bikes, with hauling consumer trailers with a custom hitch, and 400 pounds of food in the back in plastic cups. We've seen these things jackknife, we've seen them tip over, seen all sorts of stuff. It's also not a vehicle that you can really maneuver very well anymore. So, again, we just.
I hear you. I just go back to what Patrick is saying. We don't have a ton of the jackknifing vehicles on the local tiny streets. They tend to send the larger vehicles who do quite frankly, they park in the middle of North End or South End Avenue in Battery Park City, where there is more land for them to then distribute into smaller trucks that go around the neighborhood. And this is, you know, potentially a much better thing because those smaller trucks will then just put into the bike delivery ones. But the question is, where will that happen? Right? Is, you know, are we asking DHL to work and not do this on the sidewalks, but to have space that they actually take over to do
Yes.
this? I mean,
Yes.
my concern is I think we're adding and adding and adding and adding more to the streets and sidewalks
Chair,
without rules.
If I may, one of the things that you've noticed in New York City, and you see it on North End, is cross-docking. Cross-docking is the process of moving packages and deliveries from a large truck to a smaller mode of delivery. It happens on sidewalks. It happens on every corner in Manhattan. Cross-docking is illegal. Basically, it's using free space in New York City streets for your warehouse. What we are proposing is to use a barge or a freight ferry for cross-docking. So the cross-docking doesn't happen on the streets of Manhattan, or to use a micro distribution hub, for instance, under the FDR Drive or in some space that is not public space, that is not park space, that is not street space or sidewalk space. So for instance, the model that you see in our deck involves a barge or a freight ferry that leaves the Fulton Fish Market at 5:45 in the morning. Alana can talk about this. That arrives at 6:45, depending on the tide, at the Battery Maritime Building, in which packages, totes, will be pulled out of the back of trucks that stay on that barge, never leave that barge, and cross-docked on the barge into these cargo trikes. So the cross-docking that you see on North End Avenue will happen out of sight on a barge in the East River at the Battery Maritime Terminal. So two things happen here. You lose the cross-docking on your streets, and you lose the truck traffic of that larger truck coming down the West Side Highway or coming down North End Avenue and parking. So you're shedding those truck miles to get to the cross-dock location, replacing them with maritime miles, and then you're replacing the cross-dock activity, which happens on your public streets, sometimes in a very unsafe manner, with a cross-dock on a barge, out of sight, and out of the way of pedestrians. So that's the game for us. That's how we think we can win this conundrum, beat the logistics nightmare that is Lower Manhattan. It's important to remember that the fleets that we typically work with hate going into Lower Manhattan. They call it the hole. If they dispatch a truck to make a delivery around Stone Street, they are looking at a 4-hour round trip. They do not want to do it. They hate it. This is a way that they're going to save congestion fares and tolling, and they're also going to get their trucks back on time, and they're not going to kill an entire day for one delivery.
I was actually gonna ask you about the cross-docking on the public streets, because that's something that we get complaints about pretty often down here. So it's good to hear that this helps that problem that we have.
Yes, and I think we're gonna need some reports from the DOT Freight Department, because they've also done some work, and it's a very evolving for everybody. But no question, taking it into smaller vehicles, cargo bikes, and to the marine vessels is a huge jump. But even with the trucks, they're seeking improvements, because it is that.
Yeah, and that is really the goal of this. It's not just the micromobility component, which we are talking about more, but to Paul's point, we're really hoping to revitalize the waterways, so.
And we have to, because the hubs, the last mile communities, where all these deliveries emanate and originate are in Red Hook. They're in Southwest Brooklyn, they're in the South Bronx, Port Morris, Hunts Point. Those are the communities that are seeing not tens of thousands, but sometimes hundreds of thousands of truck trips in 1 or 2 zip codes every single day. This is important for Board 1, absolutely, no doubt. But it's far more important for Board 2 in the Bronx. Your colleague Ralph Acevedo is pushing this because he has 80,000 trucks on the street in and out of the South Bronx every day, coming to places like this and coming to Brownstone, Brooklyn. And he needs to make sure that people can breathe cleaner air when they're walking to school in the morning in Hunts Point and Port Morris and Mott Haven.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
The only way we can relieve them is at least they may get the trucks coming in, but if we can stop them from going out to come here and use Marine instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can tell you one concern that's come up in the past was because we have a number of different piers and docks. There's gonna have to be some legislation or something looking at what's gonna stop deliveries helter-skelter to everywhere along the waterfront, because we're surrounded on three sides water. So that's gonna be another issue that be interested in some conversation as that starts to appear to you too, with, where do you go with it? If you don't want to stop, on the other hand, you would need to control it, because that is a concern.
It's gonna create certain choke points because we've built on so much of our other pier infrastructure, so there's not a lot of places you can land. There is the heliport, there is part of the Battery Maritime building, there is probably the old Banana Pier. But we don't have a heck of a lot of other places. We made it very hard to do this right now, but there are 24 hours in a day. There's the possibility of repurposing some ferry infrastructure for off hours deliveries after the ferry service is done. So there are some possibilities, but it's still managed by the city. It's not a Wild West. The piers are very tightly managed.
Well, that is still somewhat of the issue. For instance, the one right underneath where I live
Yeah.
is
Which
a
is
ferry
where?
terminal in Battery Park City. And that one is, again, the Port Authority actually controls that pier, that particular ferry dock. But again, if you're moving into a heavily residential area and having a lot of night deliveries, again, that's something that CB1's looking out for the conversation too.
Yeah.
And our chair is also president of the Hudson River Park Advisory Council. So again, looking at, what about Pier 25 and Pier 26, and what can you do to control that or not control it? If they choose to make extra money or not. It's so unknown. Is the big-
Betty, there are so many piers in New York that have the availability to add some form of micromobility and blue highways. It should not all be based south of the Brooklyn Bridge on the east side of Manhattan. If we're going to truly make any kind of efforts to have this spread through the city, it has to be spread. Not looking at 25 and 26, it has to be spread all the way up. Looking at what's currently under review for the maritime area. The cruise ship terminals are not always filled with cruise ships. You want to get up to Midtown, you want to get up further. It has to be everywhere. We can't just let the east side of Lower Manhattan be turned into a transit hub without public area and public domain.
Yeah, that would fit the logistics model of the companies. They don't want to send their cargo trikes 6 miles to the Upper West Side. They need hubs everywhere because otherwise it's a much longer trip sending an empty box back to the waterfront. So it, in fact, validates what you're saying. They need lots of locations to do it. Unfortunately, we have built on a lot of our pier space. We're not the great waterfront city we used to be. We have to look really hard to find the good places where it makes sense to do this.
There's some great condos in.
Just, yeah, then, Eric.
Okay, so just speaking of bad actors, I did see a box truck brush a pedestrian and knock her down this morning on my way to work. Pedestrian was in the sidewalk, had the light, the box truck making the right turn also had the light, but supposed to yield. So it was a light brush. She fell. I think she was okay, but it's just indicative of the dangers. And I was right behind her, and had I been one step more forward, it could have been me, because he went fast. I think you already answered my other question, which was the bikes that I see carrying the trailers where they have up to 9 bins, those could potentially be replaced by these higher boxes and.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the idea.
Okay.
And one of the reasons, we sought out this vehicle is just for that reason that putting a trailer hitch on a consumer e-bike and towing several hundred pounds behind it is inherently very unsafe. And so we were looking for a way to, you know,
I mean, I ride in Midtown a lot and I'm a slow, cautious rider. I get passed a lot. I don't have any problems with them though. The e-bikes and the bikes kept toting those trailers and I've ridden among some of these. Not too many, a couple of these. It hasn't been a problem. So I find them to be good actors, at least so far. And the thing is, I welcome anyone who is on the street, either on 2 wheels or 3 wheels, but they're not protected. It's like they have to ride safely for their own safety, because they're at risk. It's not like they can just injure somebody else and get away scot-free. So I don't have a problem at all, but it would be helpful if the lanes were bigger. And if there was like a slow lane and a fast lane for the bikes and for the other micro mobility.
Amsterdam, I think that's, we're not there. yet. Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Your trike, does it have power brakes
yeah, so
and ABS?
it has motorcycle brakes.
Oh,
sweet. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, we'd be happy to give you an update as when we're further along.
If Ilana can just talk about US Coastal and your good news that you have to share and
These guys all sit through the cameras and invite mics.
This little boy.
Any of them.
Maybe come up and have a seat, if that's okay. Can fill a room for him.
There's an empty chair. Either one will catch you then.
This is, oh, these things, yeah. I don't know what it is for. It looks like an owl.
It will, once you start speaking, it will focus on.
Okay. So I'm with US Postal Service. I'm the president. US Postal Service is technically a venture that's been around for a couple of years. It started with the concept of tug and barge, but we quickly realized that that's not really right sized and sustainable for New York City in terms of middle and last mile deliveries. So we're working to build a fleet of greener roll-on, roll-off vessels that could integrate well with projects like the Sustainable Last Mile project. Our good news is we acquired probably one of our first vessels that will be operational. It is a former roll-on, roll-off ferry that could carry dozens of e-bikes up to a dozen electric delivery vans. And so it's flexible in that we could solve a number of issues in terms of delivery in New York City. So we've done a lot of assessments of the available pier space in New York City. And while we are on the waterfront, there's a ton of piers. Like Paul alluded to, we've allocated this pier space to a lot of other uses. And so what is remaining, there is a problem. It's a very complicated puzzle to make it fit between the right vessels and the right landing sites. And so it's not as easy as you would think to just pull up and deliver goods. A big part of the problem is having the right infrastructure, pier height, the intermediary infrastructure to be able to safely load and unload a loaded full-proof bike, for example. Can't just pull up anywhere. And so that's part of the problem we're also trying to solve in building up some short-term sites where we could test these theories and test out that short sea shipping model in New York City, and then ultimately build out more of a kind of a green network of smaller marine freight terminals. And like you said, can't just be concentrated in one area. We're looking to do this all throughout New York City so that you don't have the wild, wild west. You have kind of these maritime freight short sea hubs. And what the goal is ultimately, you're kind of abbreviating that delivery trip, right? So you're kind of bringing the goods by water closer to its ultimate destination. And so on an e-bike or an electric van, it's making a shorter trip on our roads in New York City. So
That's very exciting. Could you tell us a little bit about the marine vessel itself?
Yes.
Is it electric powered or?
So for now, we have to start with, it's technically diesel power, but we will power it with renewable diesel to make some incremental steps towards being more sustainable. The goal is once we prove out this model with these kind of secondhand vessels that have proven tried and true in terms of roll on, roll off passenger and vehicle ferry use, is to build a fleet of either battery, electric, or some other method that is cleaner and more sustainable. The problem is, like with electric trucks and vans, the infrastructure isn't there yet. And so we want to test things out and do a bit of that brain damage around what makes sense in terms of the right locations and who we need to partner with to build up that infrastructure to be able to operate, let's say, battery powered green vessels that aren't these massive container vessels that you see moving across the ocean, but rather a little smaller, but bigger than a passenger ferry, and can kind of handle maybe, let's say, a dozen containers or 60 e-bikes rather than thousands of containers, you know?
Can you paint a word picture about the boat? How many feet is it?
It's 116 feet long by 40 feet wide. And it technically could carry hundreds of passengers, but that's not what we're gonna use it for. It could carry about 60 full pro e-bikes, and let's say 12 Sprinter electric vans, and up to 8 like reefer trucks if it needs to.
And it's a roll on, roll off?
Yeah, roll on, roll off. Sorry, you think you're. It has its own ramp at the stern, so at the rear of the vessel. And so it readily has a ramp that actually solves half the equation when you're pulling up to a landing site. And so it has the industrialness to be able to handle something like a full pro bike or heavier to roll on, roll off, where you don't need a fancy landside gantry or, you know, and such to handle the vessel.
So you're looking to go to a warehouse then, for where you're actually loading these vehicles to put on, to roll on and.
Yeah.
Is it like a barge? Like, is it sort of flat or?
No, they're like self-propelled vessels, so it has its own engine and it's looks like a normal boat at the front of the vessel, and then at the back it's kind of open deck. Which could address some of the safety concerns with moving batteries. And then it has a ramp at the rear that pulls up when you're in motion and it be let down when you pull up to a landing site. So if you think of like, if you've ever gone between like the North Fork of Long Island to like Block Island or like New London, Connecticut, or even between Shelter Island.
It's like those ferries.
Yeah, like
that you
those
could drive
ferries.
on too.
Exactly, you
Okay,
could just
yeah.
drive on and drive off.
Got it. That makes sense.
So it solves a bit of the efficiency, because, you know, the only way that you can make this work is if with volume and speed and obviously safety, but it makes it work for us, it makes it work for the delivery partners. It just increases the efficiency, whereas with barges, there's a lot of logistics that have to go
Yeah.
into that.
You have to find a guy to.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is just to shift that traffic onto the vessel rather than saying we're replacing, but like, you know, shift that traffic onto the vessel.
I wanted to ask what kind of agreements you have in place or expectations you're working with, I assume, EDC on the piers. We've heard about piers on the east side, north around Basketball City being Blue Highways and several others. What partnership or agreements or discussions have you had with EDC at all in regards to the east side? And then have you been in discussion with the Hudson River Park Trust?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of moving parts. We participated in the NYC Blue Highways RFBI with, and so have been in discussions with the EDC and DOT a number of times. We're working together to figure out what would work best for kind of short-term demonstrations with our vessel, while the EDC is kind of sorting out these longer-term potential sites like Basketball City. I think was at Pier 36. And others. So we have discussions. We're trying to make Battery Maritime Building work. We're talking about areas in Red Hook and others. And so we are looking at a mix of both EDC kind of city ran sites and also private kind of industrial developers who have waterfront that they haven't necessarily developed.
Can you can you talk a little bit of how your interplay with the Battery Maritime building is going to work for where are these going to go? Once you get them onto those bikes, are they traveling on the Greenway, which most people aren't thrilled with? Are they traveling on the street? How are they getting from point A to point B? There's been a lot of concerns up by CB3, especially with the amount of interplay between pedestrians and vehicles up near the parks and in that area. And I see this potentially being another hot spot by creating a traffic zone where there is minimal traffic in terms of incoming, if you understand what I mean. The Governor's Island Ferry has cars on it, but it's not a consistent car transit period.
You're absolutely right. And it's tightly scheduled, you know, and there are times of day when there are very few vehicles on it. In terms of your question, our first customer, the first pilot commodity from port outside of Red Hook is going to be seafood from Blue Ribbon Seafood at the Fulton Fish Market. The Fulton Fish Market just received approval from EDC to develop a barge and freight ferry port on the East River, and their main customers are at the Tin Building. So ideally, in the future, landing somewhere closer to the seaport would be ideal, Pier 17, for instance. But right now, the conversations have been with DOT about Slip 5 at the Battery Maritime Building, which would mean that the cargo trikes, and it would not be many because the volume is not there just yet, would probably take the route underneath the FDR Drive viaduct up to the seaport.
So but you're not talking about putting it on the street, you're talking about having it ride up the Greenway on the sidewalk.
Well, not the sidewalk, just, you know how much width there is underneath the viaduct, underneath the FDR. And how much vacant space there really is until you get to the first restaurant underneath the drive.
So the Tin Building has a driveway. So my request and my question is, can these vehicles not be on the Greenway? Can they be on the street to drive underneath the FDR Drive on the street and then drive into the Tin Building if that's their destination, who has its own private driveway, and keep it off the regular bike lane, which interacts more greatly with pedestrians and tourists?
I don't see why not. I don't see it's a fair, at the hours that we anticipate doing the deliveries, it will be fairly sparsely used, the streets, and it makes a lot of sense. Even the driveway, the designated driveway at the Tin Building has complications when trucks interface with pedestrians on that plaza, as you know. So this is a relief to the guys from Blue Ribbon who don't like bringing trucks there. This enables them to have more mobility, and certainly the people who manage the seaport prefer these vehicles to trucks to the current state of affairs.
Right. I just want them on the street. I don't want them on the bike lane where the tourists walk in the bike lane. That is a notorious difficult bike lane anyway because of tourism and pedestrians going around the Tin Building.
Sure.
So if they are off of the Battery Maritime Building onto the street, which is right there, that's a much safer thing for pedestrians. And there is not that much traffic.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Matt had a question.
Yeah, I was curious if you had any thoughts on the recent agreement with EDC and Skyports for Pier 6. And, you know, as the board gets farther along in, you know, that development, if you had any guidance for the board, you know, as that Blue Highway develops, things that maybe the board should be thinking about.
We've reached out to Skyports. They said they weren't ready for a conversation. EDC has encouraged us to keep that conversation going or try and begin it anyway. I think it would be an outstanding location. It's actually closer to the Tin Building. There are some complications right now about bringing a barge or a freight ferry onto the site. There's going to need to be some bulkhead work Ilana can tell you more about it than I can. So it's not ready yet. So it may be 2 years away in terms of the kind of restoration that's gonna require to interface with a boat. But I think it would be outstanding. And we think it would be a great location.
Yeah, I think just being mindful between obviously the interaction, kind of like the layout, rethinking the layout of the pier itself, just the interaction between visitors for the heliport versus deliveries, with e-bikes. And then as you suggested, kind of like interaction with that bikeway, the greenway. When we were thinking about it, we were thinking there is actually space, I think, to kind of create kind of a third lane. That's technically on the road, but like is cargo bike specific for deliveries, to kind of create a better flow in and out. And also thinking about the addition of some traffic signals or signage to try to alleviate those safety concerns in terms of like the influx of bikes. But again, it's gonna be some time before you could develop the infrastructure. So maybe a little bit.
Could help facilitate those conversations and encourage them. We would love it.
Yeah. And I would think also like, in terms of the development of the infrastructure being kind of open to, like I said, sometimes it's a very specific vessel that could fit a very specific type of infrastructure. And so being open to, infrastructure that could be, a little more agnostic of the type of vessel that can come in and out. If you're using passenger ferries, it's the utilization of maybe an asset that isn't being used all the time, but it's limited in terms of volume. So if the landing site could be kind of a little more open or agnostic in terms of the vessels it could accept, that would allow more, I think, scalability and flexibility in just how well leveraged the site is for maritime freight and alleviating the trucking congestion in Lower Manhattan.
We're excited to have Brendan next to you.
This is an incredible conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm just gonna be that person. Can we do a time check? How are we doing on time?
We're fine. If you have a question, I'd rather.
I don't have a question. I just want to see where we were, because I don't even know where we are in the agenda, et cetera, but.
We're at the end.
Okay.
Second of two.
Well, we also still always have our, news we've been used. I also need to-
That'll make sure people, any other questions? Yeah.
Like ideally, what other piers around the city would you expand to? Would there be piers in Midtown you would use, or would it be mostly where you said like Port Jervis and the Red Hook area?
It depends on the vessel.
Yeah, it depends on the vessel, but getting into Midtown would be integral too. Midtown West is a key one.
Like near the Intrepid?
Yeah. Yeah. It also is, again, you kind of have to meet the potential customers, or the delivery providers where they are. And, so where are the hubs of their warehouses? Where would it make most sense? And so you look at Midtown, you look at down here and just the hot spots for deliveries and warehouses. So
Have you
spread out.
have you had any dialogues with Hudson Yards and any of the large complex development projects that are happening going up the west side to be able to work therefore with, even if it's a micro delivery center hub? I mean, there's so many projects on the west side right now, north of 23rd Street up to 59th, that I'm curious what conversations, if any, you've had there. And I will still put it out there. Lower Manhattan has, in the area that one block off of where you're talking on our east side, we have 7 new residential conversions from commercial to residential. And the additional people coming in could be 40 to 75,000, depending on how the buildings go. The concerns that I will raise again and again and again, and every time we have this conversation, is that what I do see is adding to our traffic in a variety of different ways. And until we get the blue highways to be a more fully laid out, sustainable, it's going to be very difficult because the trucks are still going to be there for companies that don't work with you. And so then we're adding the micro transit, and we haven't established pathways, rules and regs, and ways to safeguard pedestrian safety, who will need the sidewalks, who need the bike lanes, not to be dominated by cargo. If we're going to dominate the sidewalks and by cargo, then heck, let's just send y'all up the FDR Drive.
Yeah. It's always gonna be the challenge in a very dense city. Those 40 to 50,000 new people are gonna be ordering a lot of food online, I suspect. And they're gonna be ordering a lot of stuff from Amazon. And if we can make a dent in the truck traffic and help rationalize deliveries that are gonna be consuming all those new residential conversions, then we will have met your goals and met our carbon reduction goals at the same time. So we hear you. We're completely aligned.
I'd love to hear more rollout, rules and regs, and more thought process to how to not only move the transit, but your priority concern is moving transit and goods and where your infrastructure lies for your boats. What I'm looking at and talking about is having that discussion of understanding how it connects through and affects the pedestrian experience. The pedestrian experience involves the business workers, the commuters, the tourists, and the people who live here 24/7. That needs to be a priority as large as moving the cargo is.
Absolutely. What might help is a briefing that we'll arrange for you next month or whenever you'd like it from Net Zero Logistics. They're the people who operationalize this. They're the folks who I think would be most responsive to your questions, and I think would most welcome this kind of line of inquiry. So, and I think you need to get to know who's delivering, who's ultimately responsible for delivering packages, not just through this program, but through many other routes and logistics plans throughout the city. So we would love to connect you, and they should come and give you a briefing. Whether this project moves forward in the way we hope it will or not, you should get to know them.
I'd be happy to have them come in whichever way. And if you need connections on the west side up along with the Hudson River Park Trust, I'm happy to make an introduction for y'all over there as well to try and get some sites.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The conversation would be interesting, but I would also consider see if someone in the controller's office is already would be interested in, because they were concerned about legislation moving forward.
Yeah.
And brought that up. So that could be good to introduce them early on.
Good.
To the logistics, because that's exactly what Eric had brought up before. What about when we bring up these bigger commercial cargo bikes? And he'd said, we didn't look at it, but we needed to look at it. So I think involving them, put that on the agenda.
Definitely.
To include.
I think they'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. They need to get to know you anyway.
Well, that is what he asked for, so he needs to get all the players, not just what we have to say, but what the people who I think have to say.
Yeah.
So thank you all, it's been fascinating, and I do look forward to updates as you go along, because I think this is a very exciting thing that's really just at the beginning, and it's great to see it happening.
Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say it might be good to get also, in addition to EDC, but New York City DOT, the rate unit, in to talk about what their plan is for the piers, especially Battery Maritime, especially EDC's, freight plan for Skyports. Putting that in the mix as another way to start to explore how to make this more equitable, as Madam Chairwoman was.
Yes, that's, I already mentioned to Zach, I want to bring the freight unit in and even talk about the trucks,
Yeah.
that problem as it is now.
Yeah.
Because some of it is, they're making changes already,
Yeah.
to see how it works.
Denise
So,
Mendez is amazing. If you get her in here, she would be very responsive. So,
write that down.
yeah, and I'll make an introduction if you'd like.
Great.
Well, do you know Kate?
Oh.
She's in the deal.
There, of course. Your boss is amazing.
Hey, who's your boss? Edmund Carter.
Oh. I didn't know if there was.
Thank you all, and thank you for coming out on such a cold evening.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it was great to have you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sensors, think about it.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
It'd be like a fun community outreach kind of thing. It's fun,
Yes,
you know.
and I have March green vessels. Anyway, what I'm gonna leave for you next is I did hear what Brendan said. I do have some news and updates, but one, you can leave at any time, or if someone wants to move to adjourn, you can also do that, and then I'll just continue on for those who are interested in hearing.
Go ahead. I'm just always just time sensitive. This is what I do in the daytime as well. People know me as get shit done, literally.
Definitely are. But people should all feel free to leave at any time. As far as I'm concerned, the main part is adjourned.
Do you wanna move the slides?
Not really. Second item is actually for Kate. This was just a follow-up on last month. The website is up. I kept saying the website, we want it up. It is up. And what it has on it. I didn't realize the Battery Place was part of. This is from the 1990s when they did the last updating of Route 9A. So when they talk about how modern it is, this goes back to the 1990s. This is going to be one going on now, this 2-year study. It's going to be updated from that, and hence looking at multimodal potentially. They're talking about. Oh,
Why is it a .com? Why isn't it like
Sorry.
a West Side Highway dot
Or-
NYC dot something or another? Why is it a .com?
Well, it's a state.
State website.
Why is it that? Especially if it's, okay, anyway.
And the kind of information you can find on it, because it is very useful to people. You can get the information, but if you want the public involvement in meetings, you can get all the schedules that are there. But staying involved, where you can be in email communication directly, for those of you who have advice or questions to ask, you can do, they're trying to make this as interactive as been promised. So do be aware of this up and what it will do for you. Federal Register. So you can even get the date on it. It was on the 12/18. Is the register that it is. This is just online. So you can see the website on the top bar. I can just email it to you. The summary for those, since I follow the Access Board because I'm interested in disability, but in fact, the DOT or the department, as they're going to call it, program, is amending the Americans with Disabilities Act to adopt the recommendations that came up the Access Board that I mentioned back in August of, and actually 2023. It's been going on for quite a while. It's finally gotten to the point where the feds have said, okay, and now it's gone on to the state, federal DOT. And they have accepted things. But what's interesting is the DOT federally is limited in what they can do. One of the things they can do at the public right of way is dealing with the accessibility of public transportation facilities. So they're interested in things such as a floating bus stop on Park Road. Which is why I brought this up specifically to mention, because it's just so timely for what's going on in our district already. What was kind of interesting is the DOT decided not to make any changes. The biggest area where they got comments from people and agencies, and I'm sure New York City DOT was one of them, was on this whole idea of transit stops. And after going through all this, you get a lot more information if you go on to the federal website and read the register. But they have actually said they're not going to make any changes to them, except they are looking to recommend, and I wish I had put this, if I could redo the resolution, things such as applying to transit stops. There's one. Overlapping boarding areas for them. There's a lot of detail. Getting down to it, they recognized the number of comments on this area. They are going to, the comments that really hit them were, we need more research because they're just so little known about them. If there's something we didn't ask for in our resolution, but in the future, remind me, we should be asking them to use as a learning site. Also aids like the tactile warning surface. The real focus was on people with low vision. If you think about it, how do they know there's a bus stop out on a floating island while they're on the sidewalk? There really is none.
Betty, there was more information that came out about the issues on the transit island for Park Row this week after the snowstorm. Did you,
I saw some of those. Some of them, as a disabled person, I agree with what they said, but nevertheless, this is separate. This is just for the federal DOT. But the wayfinding signs, so some of the things they brought up that we really didn't even think about that in the future should be thought about. To make it safer for people with visual impairments. Holland Tunnel, yes, their prices went up. Yes, congestion pricing started. And the signs are up. The MTA has updated their website. When you get more information, so people with a lot of detailed questions, by all means, go online. And take the reminder, update your Easy Pass. Make sure it has the correct license plate, your current one on it. Otherwise, you're gonna be paying by mail, you're not gonna be paying the lower Easy Pass rate. Just fair. Not the MTA data. For those who are interested in lots of data, Street Blog did an article about a day ago, and it was on the only explainer you ever need. If you want to see information, boy, did they have information. Nothing's tangential to it. This is an MTA table, so you can get this on the MTA website. But this is also a good reminder to people. Tolls by mail cost a lot more money than if you get it on the Easy Pass, so stay up to date. The timing that you pick makes a difference. One question that I see keep coming up, I don't know what, you get charged when you enter the zone, not when you leave the zone. I still see a lot of ambiguity about that. I arrived during the overnight hours, but I'm leaving during the peak. I don't care when you leave, you're gonna be charged when you enter. And you would get the charge for the overnight rate. In that article, we went through all kinds of things. This is DOT data, but they said, what about all the people who may not be paying for congestion pricing because they're obscured license plates or something? Here is the data on the DOT website. But interestingly enough, if you look at it, the little blue area, those are no plates, e-bikes. Well, they don't have plates and they wouldn't be charged even if they had plates. So those don't really count, but the rest would all be technically charged. And there is a lot of work to be done. So they can build. And the DOT got them from red light cameras as well as speed cameras. And what was also interesting is they remind us all the data that's supposed to be collected, and this came up from the federal, what they brought back when they did the environmental portion. This is data we should be getting in the future. Vehicle, all the information about the various vehicles, who they are, where they are, how many there are. Information, indirect things about the ridership in the actual mass transit system that's being funded. Does it go up? How does it change? What's being done with capital projects are being done with this money that's being generated. All this follow-up, we should be able to follow over time. Also the monitoring that's supposed to be done about air quality measures. These are the ones in particular. This should be provided over time related to the project. So we have to make sure these things are followed through on. And also things that are going to be done on revenue basis. As I said, Controller Brad Lander has already sent a letter to the MTA asking, telling them they better be publishing this information. But Streets Blog said, believe me, we're going to be following this up anyway. So I think the press in general will also be looking for it. But this is going to be something we're going to care about in the future. To remind people who various discounts apply to, do go online and register. Don't just assume and forget about it. Take advantage of it if you have it. What I've gotten mixed messages about was about if you qualify for the $50,000 income below low income. I had heard from the MTA on one of their online things that you could earn your 10 during the off-hour times, the cheap times. So others have said, no, you have to earn them during the high volume times. In fact, the discount only counts during the high volume times. But it sounds like you can actually earn your 10 free ones, your 10 paid ones on the off hours, which would be cheaper for you. But do look into that. Gridlock alert. Remember that was a 25% surge. The governor has revoked that and said that isn't going to happen. So don't worry about that. or complain if you do get hit with it. Scam alert that the MTA has put out. There are people already, this was via text, I know, looking at their total collection agencies. And there is no such thing, so they remind you, go to Easy Pass directly or go to the toll by mail, newyork.com. Avoid the scams. Yes, they've started already. And this was kind of interesting too, but have you ever thought about it? All of the pay for hires, they have to register. So for those who thought they turned on the cameras, so all of a sudden those surcharges are going to just happen and all the drivers, all those vehicles are enrolled. No. So you had to start signing up after. You're asking them to speed it up. If you want to get more information about it, you can look it up. But this was put out by somebody specifically for those drivers saying, probably want to get enrolled, because if you don't get enrolled, you're going to get the $9 a day. Keep in mind, and if you got any information, I was hoping drivers wouldn't do that and then collect, to make more money by collecting the per fee, but they have to do it. There's a whole service they use for billing. But you, the customer in your taxi or in your Uber or whatever gets, but they have to kind of be online or offline, I guess, with it. But did you hear anything? But Lyft is going to offer riders $1.50 in and out of the congestion zone area. Keeping in mind $1.50 is the surcharge on these kinds of vehicles, the Ubers and the Lyfts. It's 75 cents on the taxis and the black cars. So you may, as a consumer, want to look at taxis may get more and more appealing to you because their congestion fees are just plain lower. You remember we have 2 congestion fees if you're a taxi user. So we had the existing $2.75 one, and this one is being put on top of that, which is $1.50 per ride. This is the reduced price for the Ubers, and it is 75 cents for the taxis. But so you may find taxis actually are cheaper than the Ubers, so follow that. The best price. Congestion pricing, if you recall, we had the one resolution in our district about the signs in the Brooklyn Bridge. If you look at it from the outside, this was written for other people. So think of this as traffic coming potentially into our neighborhoods versus what's going to happen to you because you're going to return to the district anyway. It doesn't apply to you the same way as was intended by the FDA, which is CBS News. This is if you're arriving from Brooklyn, how you can get in to get onto the FDR, get onto the free roads, in other words. And as you notice, there's only one that doesn't charge, as well as the Hugh Carey Tunnel. So those could be desirable for people who are bypassing to use. Because if you look at what happens if they take the Queensboro or the Queens Tunnel, there's no way for them to get on the FDR without being charged a toll. The congestion pricing, so they're already going to be paying in the zone. Likewise, Lincoln Tunnel and Holland Tunnel, there is no way to do it without being charged on a city street.
So Betty, even if, you return on a Sunday night, you want to leave the zone Tuesday morning, but you want to leave by the Holland or the Lincoln Tunnel, let's say Waze takes you along the west side of West Street. To get to the tunnel, you're going to have to go back into the congestion zone, you'll get charged again, right? So while you're not charged leaving, as you said earlier, you get onto the free roads, but if you want to take the tunnels, you're going to get charged. So you better stay on West Street and go north, right?
You may be. Right, or find a different way where you can stay in the zone.
Right.
You're not charged if you stay in the zone.
Yeah,
So
right.
for those of us who live in the zone, you can stay in the zone until you exit into the tunnel routes. You're probably okay, but everybody else is going to have to. Well, but the city roads within the zone are okay for us, as long as we don't get off.
Betty, I'm just checking because there's been a ton of Battery Park City people asking these questions because of the way the West Side Highway works or doesn't. So, their fears and questions are if they're going from Battery Park City up to, let's say 41st or 42nd, technically they're staying in the zone the entire time, they are not charged, correct?
That's what the MTA said on their site and what they said on their various.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, so it's amazing. If you're in the zone and stay in the zone, you're fine. Just be careful you don't leave the zone and re-enter without you being aware of it.
Well, that's where I'm confused still. So do you leave the zone by getting onto the free roads?
No,
No,
So if you do take West Street then to go up to the tunnels or whatever, you're still not, you haven't left the zone by getting to West Street.
correct.
Ah, okay.
So again, when you're watching your timing to get into the cheap zone, it's when you enter, it's not when you leave, or when you travel around within the zone for us that live in the district. Yeah, so again, if you look at it and the free that they're showing everybody, they're all in our district. So hopefully people who are entering to get onto these free roads aren't gonna be heavily trafficked into ours, but they may very well use these routes that CBS News was telling you. Use, you wanna get from the FDR, take the Brooklyn Bridge to that. If you wanna go, otherwise, the West Side Highway, take the Hugh Carey Tunnel. The other parts of Manhattan within the congestion zone have no way of getting around the toll. But we have, yeah. Next.
One of those is set in place and one is not.
Yeah, for those also looking to take advantage of some of the things that are happening that are positive. For those who have monthly, it's only for monthly pass users, but if you do, they have a system where you can, through the end of March, you can take 2 passengers for $1 each to go along with you while you're on your monthly pass. Now, that's a warning. If you don't have a monthly pass and you're going and saying, there could be more people riding until the end of March, taking advantage of this. So that's where you stand and what you're looking at.
Betty, I did want to mention that while we're talking about positives, I have started to see Gateway Plaza got notification from a couple of cleaning companies that they would be increasing their rates due to congestion pricing and changing their pickups and drop off times. And I just want to be really transparent that the charges are being passed on, much like it is in a cab, to the consumers. So
Again, I'd say that's somewhat fluid. There are others that were in the newspapers, in fact, talking about that very thing, passing it on. But then I read the follow-up and you follow it later and they say, well, it really depends just how many deliveries we make and then we'll proportion it down to what the cost is per delivery and it won't be the whole fee. So I think also in the
while I appreciate that, the notification we got from the local cleaning company was a 15-cent per pound increase to account for congestion pricing.
this is their way of increasing their fees, period. End of story. It's a good excuse. It's a good excuse. But for the meeting of this, for the Queens being done, remember when we passed the resolution about asking about West Side Highway and a bus route there? They said they would get to Manhattan after they finish the Queens. So hopefully we may be closer to them starting to work on Manhattan and some of the roads. And redesigning our bus routes. But keeping in mind, there will be additional service that's going into the outer boroughs on buses coming into the congestion zone. Those of us like in Battery Park City where we get the Staten Island Express buses, it's passing PS 150. We could see an increase in number of buses. That reason. So keep an eye out. It'll be interesting to see what we find out. There is a focus on buses again, because the survey is finding out just how many people's jobs were really affected by the lateness of their bus arrivals. And this is just the humor of the people from Stop the Jump, who hate helicopters even more than the congestion. And there is some legislation, and I'll bring this up later, when there's a number on it. If those who are thinking of this helicopter, there isn't a number yet on the legislation, so it has to be in the future. We talk about it. But multitasking, talking about all the various chaos, and I think all these things have happened in our district. Everything from the crashing helicopters to the falling construction cranes, to the reckless motorists, to the speeding e-scooters. But again, they're texting, so there are no hazards. The turnstile jumping fees have gone up January 2025, so those fees have gone up for buses as well as subway. Lots of things for the new year. DOT's annual bike counts 4 years in a row continues to climb, number of bikes. And the increase, you can see, and this combines all of them. But the Brooklyn Bridge is pretty highly considered among them. And Cody, if you'd like to mention what this is.
Well, that sign there, that no-ped sign was sort of new to me, I think, and so I had to stop and take a picture of it because, when the bike path was first installed, like a few years ago, I asked the police officer, why are you not stopping that moped? And they said, why? Why would we? And I said, well, she goes, there's not even a sign. And so,
Now there's a sign.
But where is it? Was always illegal.
yeah. The Brooklyn entrance. There's one on the Manhattan Bridge too, on the Brooklyn entrance, but I don't see one over here.
By Adams Street, Cody?
Yeah.
Cody made the sign.
I made them myself.
I'll show you a sign.
On a TNT sign.
Been pushing them like. Brooklyn.
I have no time to do it. They stopped every month.
It's like,
No, I know. Maybe like an occasional.
They do stop them occasionally.
Occasionally.
Yeah, they have like a crackdown.
I've just seen like one at the bit of the Manhattan Bridge.
It is?
but it's all in Manhattan.
That doesn't look like Adams Street.
It's a Brooklyn borough.
It looks like a real sign.
Yeah.
Is there?
Like,
Department, okay, hold on a second, yeah. Oh, you saw it?
well, no, it looks like it says, like, under no mopeds, it looks like there's writing, and usually it's like New York City Department.
That doesn't look like Adams Street, Cody.
It is?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I know. I saw it.
See if we can get them on
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, but then it ends.
Okay.
Adam and Hillary?
City bike is.
It's, yeah, I guess it's Adams and Hillary. Here's the Manhattan Bridge.
Actually, not until fall of 2025, but for those who,
Adam and
like
Hillary?
Justine, have complained, they
Main
go out to
entrance.
the outer boroughs, and then
Which I think
there's
is.
no city bike either when they get there. It's being good.
It didn't look like they.
That will be starting to change in some of the locations. As well as potentially bringing more cyclists into the city. Because they're adding at least 250 stations, but they're going to be, at least half are going to be e-bikes, which allows for bigger, longer distances. But the downside is fees are also going up on city bike, and this will be coming up again. Cody and I were talking about this earlier, so, or this will be a future discussion. Remember, we passed the street plan resolution a while ago too. And yes, once again, the 50 miles of bike lanes, they actually only did 25.7 last year. The 30 miles of bus lanes, we got 5.3. This is the whole city. So yes, it continues to lag in 2024. Bringing up from the controller's office, actually, the feds did pass the ban on the off-brand lithium batteries. So they shouldn't be able to come in and out of the country anymore. Hopefully, that should make a dent in the fires. For those, have you ever watched? You're a fan, they're actually very good. You never mentioned them, Jane. But the Curb Enthusiasts.
Are you in them?
No.
You're like, don't.
Saw it, I was like.
You've seen Emily do these?
Oh, no, I'm aware of it, yeah, I have, yeah, I'm not on.
Really?
In fact, what's interesting, and you can ask them to change, the first episode, was
She had a-
really drunk, and they don't give her name.
Far on Jersey.
All the others, they talk about who the speaker,
Which is-
but why they don't mention it.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I said, somebody to take back and ask them, why don't they update that, because she was
Yeah.
impressed with me, and did an excellent job. Virtual transit affairs, the veto. $65 billion capital plan, which starts in 2025 through 2029. However, and it was Hasty and Stuart Cousins do represent the state rep, but they also sit on the MTA board of directors too. But what they said is they don't know where the state funding is going to come from for their portion of it, which is why they feel like they're in a catch-22 to pass something that they know they can't pay their portion on yet. At the same time, What also happened was, this is also a good magazine, the state controller came up saying the MTA has not done enough to consolidate procurement across agencies. And so we need to do more to control the expenses that the MTA has. Which also aligns with things that CB1 has brought up in the past. But if there is no new capital, or if there is, one of the things they had talked about doing was replacing some of the 40-year-old subway cars. And those are, for those who like the ones with the yellow and orange seats on them, those are the ones they're looking to replace. Fortunately or unfortunately, those are the 40-year-old ones. The MTA's Omni card now has senior, but in fact, it's all reduced fares, covered their fares, student fares, seniors, everybody are now covered. So hopefully that'll get more people encouraged to switch, which was the real intent of doing this. And it is on everything. And that's, you can also have your transfers on it as well. That's really updated. The taxi industry, yeah, that's an ongoing saga for their insurance, which is insolvent. But that was kind of interesting.
You mentioned with the Omni, Hudson Rail Link, that they would also accept Omni. Where is that? It was on the slide before. You know where
That was in New York.
No, I mean, you know where that is? What service that is? I don't know where.
What is Hudson Rail Link?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't need, I think that was New York.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
They're reporting. So
I'm Googling it.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, I'll do that myself. All right.
Do we know when the path will start cross honoring Omni? Because they don't at the moment.
I'm turning to that because I have no idea.
That would be a good thing to find out, especially because we have so many path riders in our neighborhood, and there'll be a path outage, as you know, Betty, I think.
Yes, it's the month of February.
Yeah, so it'd be good to understand for the local community what services can be used on the waterway and how path will account for anything like that.
Okay, but yes,
But
this has to do.
To remind you that the AirTrain still doesn't, they're the only one that doesn't have the senior fare or the half fare facility.
Yeah, and I don't think they intend to either. That was a
Right.
question that came up, that, yeah, that's very unfortunate, but that seems to be the position of the Port Authority. Anyway, solvency, again, is an ongoing saga, because they do insure 60% the for-hire vehicles in New York City. And nobody brought this up for months. Were you aware of the upside down traffic light?
No.
In our neighborhood. I guess it's Sixth and Lister, and nobody mentioned it.
Nobody tried.
I'm not paying attention to lights. But for months, the light was upside down, and it is kind of weird. This was on a video, so I got to watch it. When the red and the green lights go on in their level versus one up and one down. It did strike me as odd, but it didn't immediately strike me what the problem was.
There's one of those in Syracuse that's intentionally like that in an Irish neighborhood there, and it's flipped up for cultural reasons.
Well, I wondered too, 'cause it's right next to a bar.
Is the
That's right.
yield white? Is the yield white?
Well, maybe they asked for it.
Well, I mean, if there's been no accidents, I guess people are still following it even though it was upside
Well,
down.
I understand it was corrected. But maybe, who knows, who turned it. Okay, a change for the information that comes out there. They're now, as a company, looking at putting together the dash cam information so they can have immediate information about road conditions on various spots. And keep in mind, if your car has all of this technology, this broadcasting, be aware that it is. None of this stuff is private once it hits the airwaves. Privacy fix. For your concern too, because you've mentioned about the problems with some of the robo-taxis. A lot of them were with Cruise, a number of them were, and Cruise is no longer continuing with robo-taxis. It's pulled out completely out of that market. And they're bringing it all in-house, so they're going to put it in private vehicles. but not robo-taxi. So it'll be assist, since it'll be a private vehicle. In other words, I have a steering wheel and it'll have a brake. That's that.
So they were a competitor of Waymo? and they're
Yes.
now out?
Yes. And in fact, Waymo's moved ahead and they got certified in their emergency vehicle detection, which was kind of interesting. So they are making steps. And I didn't realize what some of these steps were, so kind of interesting. And just so you know, the Pope is up on electric too. Not necessarily, but he hasn't.
It's an electric G-Wagon.
But it has a driver, but he can afford one. And talking about airports, so the next area is gonna be looking at airports going electric as well, otherwise, which I thought was kind of horrifying, which is why I put it in there. Was that soon by 2050, if they don't go electric, actually, just the airlines themselves, the airplanes, will make up 22% of global CO2 emissions, which is pretty amazing.
Is it just American or is it like all?
No,
of
that's all. But if there are no electric planes, there are no electric planes, and obviously with Boeing, we are a big consumer, but also a big manufacturer. And if that isn't enough, you're into the environmental stuff, which most of us are, the microplastics, you always think about the plastic bags and things thrown into the ocean, and those are very real concerns. For those, us in the transportation world, in China, they're now finding, because of this, in human urine, they're finding the car particles from the tires. So they're raising the red flag of looking at what are they gonna do with car tires? It's becoming a real health question. So I see you next time, it'll be Lunar New Year. And you're the snake, I don't know, I always. It's a letdown after the dragon, but. Nevertheless. Thank you all. If you ever have any ideas, by all means, let me know what you want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
It's also.
Right now, or
Today.